Hello, America, and welcome to the Glenn Beck program and to the Blaze. This is the network that you are building. I read this to my kids when they were younger, my older kids, and I just started reading it to my son, Rafe, and my youngest, Cheyenne. And it starts in a way that most stories don't start. It starts like this. In a hole in the ground, there lived a hobbit. Not a nasty, dirty, wet hole filled with ends of worms and an oozy smell, nor yet a dry, bare, sandy hole with nothing in it to sit down on or eat. It was a hobbit hole, and that means comfort. That's an important line, and that means comfort. And hopefully by the end of the show today, you'll understand why. I'm doing this show tonight on The Hobbit because it's an important piece of history and an important story for our time. J.R.R. Tolkien is the author, and he wasn't really sure how he ever came up with that line. Maybe it was divine providence. But whatever the reason, his heart or his shoes, maybe that was a different story. He took that one line and ran with it, and he ended up with one of the best-selling novels in all of history. And the movie version of The Hobbit comes out this Friday. And I think this is a movie that everybody in America should see. Do not see this with your kids, please. The images are really terrifying, I think. Especially when they're 3D. And my son is 8, and I like to think, oh, my son, he can handle anything. No, I'm not taking my son to this. Maybe 10 or 11. We have a rule in our house. It says 13. When you're 13, let's go to the movies. But it is great. It's a great movie. And it's a great story. The characters are facing exactly what we're facing in the country right now. And most importantly, you will find yourself in this movie, and that could be a good thing or a bad thing. There's also deep faith parallels. Beginning Friday, all of us will have a friend that will talk about this movie. And if we go, we'll all leave the movie and we'll say, my gosh, did you see how great the 3D was? Did you see the action? Did you see this? A lot of movies generate buzz. But this one has the power to enlighten. And you can play a huge role because you, after this show, are going to know things about this movie and about this story that very few people know. We have one of the world's leading experts on Tolkien and The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. The messages behind this movie. You'll have the opportunity to say, I know that was great, but you know that one part? Do you know what that one part was really all about? And you'll actually have an enlightened conversation that could open the eyes of someone else. You'll be able to ask them, that part, what was that about? And they will think. This movie has stood the test of time. Tolkien poured his blood, sweat, and tears into finishing what he had started with that one line. These are Tolkien's original writings. And I want to show you some of his handwriting here. This is just one of the letters that he wrote, but his handwriting looks an awful lot like if you've ever bought a reprint of his books, you would recognize the handwriting. It's a little elfin in handwriting. It was September 1937 that it was published, and he published 1,500 copies. It took him 2 months to sell 1,500 copies. We sell 1,500 copies in about the first 20 minutes our books go on sale now. But the difference between The Hobbit and my books, I may sell 1,500 copies quickly, but all told, mine will never sell in the neighborhood of 100 million copies for just The Hobbit. Here's the interesting thing. If you look at his writings and some of the things that he wrote later, he never thought it would be a success. This is actually a copy of his writings here. I have no confidence in my work except that forced on me by entirely unexpected success. A great book, they say, and expect that alarms me. My heart was and is in the work, but not on my sleeve, and I have no relish at all for having it stripped bare. All he really wanted to do was create a lasting work for his children, one that his children could enjoy. The rest of the world loved it, but you have to go back to his own writings where he talks about his kids. Did his kids like it? He writes, well, they liked it, but they weren't absolutely wild about it. They just quite liked it. Tolkien was a Christian, and not an ordinary Christian. He was a deep, profoundly practicing Catholic. He converted C.S. Lewis from atheism to Christianity. That's no small accomplishment in and of itself. C.S. Lewis is one of, if not the most influential Christian writers of our time. Lewis, you might know, went on to write incredibly successful and important works such as the Chronicles of Narnia and the Screwtape Letters. But if you know anything about C.S. Lewis, if you've ever read or seen any of the movies now made, C.S. Lewis was very overt in his messaging. He was proud to be an evangelical writer. Tolkien avoided that like the plague. He didn't want to pound his readers over the head with sidewalk preaching. But that's not to say he didn't have a strong underlying message of faith in his novels. He did. And he says so in his own handwriting. It shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone, but now in our university systems, now our educators and our commentators, even the writers, the producers, and the actors are now trying to erase the Christian messaging underlying The Hobbit and later in The Lord of the Rings. Tolkien called them in his own handwriting, quote, a fundamentally religious and Catholic work. We have the letters. He wrote these himself, explaining his intentions, his fears, and everything he was thinking about when he wrote the novels. But that's not stopping those now in the elite circles of Hollywood or the elite circles of education who are hell-bent on removing faith from everyday life. They're even trying to remove faith from C.S. Lewis's work in Narnia. I don't know how you miss the images in Narnia. I mean, it's pretty obvious that the lion who was killed on the stone table is Jesus. I mean, the one line where he says, there is a law where one can give his life. I mean, hello? C.S. Lewis said he couldn't even understand how anyone could get mixed messages. But then again, he never met Liam Neeson or any of the producers in Hollywood. Liam Neeson, he's the one who voiced the lion, Aslan, Jesus. He said when this last movie came out, quote, Aslan symbolizes a Christ-like figure, but he also symbolizes for me Muhammad, Buddha, and all the great spiritual leaders and the prophets over the centuries. That's who Aslan stands for, as well as a mentor figure for kids. That's what he means to me. So now all of a sudden Aslan is also, he could be Tony Dungy. He could just be anybody. Except I don't think Muhammad or any other spiritual leaders or mentor figures died for the forgiveness of all of the sins of others. There's only one that did that. But don't let the facts get in the way of good spin. This one is hard, The Hobbit, because Tolkien's work is not as overt. There are no obvious references to Jesus, Moses, Noah, or anybody else. No one prays, no one goes to church. There are no Bibles laying around, but yet he says it is fundamentally Christian. How? Tolkien told a friend, quote, I am a Christian, and of course what I write will be from that essential viewpoint, and that I have purposely kept all allusions to the highest matters down to the mere hints. But it is the mere hints that you will be able to share with your friends after you see it. That will be so enjoyable. And doing the research for this show, I did it, and I didn't share them with my wife. And the entire movie, she would have killed me if I would have done this, but the entire movie, because I saw it on Monday, I sat there and I thought, oh my gosh, look at that. It gives it a whole different level. You'll enjoy it 10 times more. The mere hints. He's done so well that now even the actors are confused. Quote, people like these stories, and yet there isn't an archbishop and there isn't a pope telling you what to believe. Despite being a Catholic, I don't think he was trying to write a Catholic parable, so I don't think we were meant to draw conclusions about faith from it. Oh, Really? I'm sorry. Do you have the collection of original letters? Because we do. But yet, the debate continues. I believe that when you look at the underlying messaging, as we will tonight, you will see a story of a spiritual battle between good and evil, greed and want versus humility and charity, divine providence over dumb luck, fear versus faith, and perseverance. I also think that you will find yourself in this story. You might be Bilbo Baggins. That's who I kind of related to, especially when people came into their house and they were eating all of his food. You will find yourself Bilbo Baggins. He says about adventures, which I think we're all on. How many of us want to do or say or be in the battle that we're in right now? I don't. I had other plans for my life. But an adventure came to my door. And Bilbo Baggins says at the very beginning, I have no time. I have no time. We're plain, quiet folks, and we have no use for adventures. Nasty, disturbing, uncomfortable things, adventures. They make you late for dinner. I can't see what anybody sees in them. Exactly the way I feel about most of the stuff I do and say today, and I bet you feel a lot alike. As he progresses through his journey, it's apparent that our life is a journey as well. This can be mindless entertainment, and it can be enjoyed thoroughly. But this time around, if you want to go see The Hobbit and have it last and possibly change your life, this is the show for you tonight. It will give you something that will give you your wind back in your sails. It will help you remember that you're on a journey, why you're on this quest, and that when you come back home, which you will not be the same as when you left. Back in a minute. This is a great movie, Peter Jackson's going to take about, I think he's going to take about 8 hours to tell The Hobbit. Let me butcher a 75-year-old classic by telling it to you in about 35 seconds. These guys were driven from their home here in these mountains. They were driven from their home by a dragon who just loves gold, and this was the source of like a lot of the gold. So now the dragon is here, drunk with gold fever. These people have no home anymore. It's, I think, the next generation, and they want their home back. The wizard decides that he's going to help the 13 dwarfs and the one hobbit, because for some reason he needs a hobbit. Why does he need a hobbit? What does the story actually mean and tell us about the journey that we're on? Paul Kerry, he is a good friend of mine and a good friend of the program. He got his doctorate at Tolkien's University at Cambridge. He has Oxford. He has taught in England, taught in Princeton, and now is currently a professor at BYU. He is the author and editor of 2 books about Tolkien and Christianity, The Ring and the Cross, Christianity and the Lord of the Rings, and Light Beyond All Shadow, Religious Experiences in Tolkien's Work. Thought we'd get the expert on this. Okay, so, Doctor, I guess we start with the 3 fundamentals of Tolkien that you need to look for, and they are what?
I would say that key to The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings would be providence. What is providence? How does it work? Is it mere luck? That's how some people interpret the events of The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, particularly in The Hobbit. Is it just luck that Bilbo ends up finding the ring? That they're able to read the map at key moments? That there are escapes made? Or is there something providential, a grander design at work here? The second one, I think, would be purpose. That there's a purpose. Bilbo doesn't know it at first. But as this adventure, this there and back occurs, he begins to understand that he has a greater purpose than what he at first initially thought he had.
His purpose originally is just to be comfortable.
That's right.
Yeah, just be quiet, have no adventures, just be comfortable, just be a part of my little neighborhood and just disappear, just be cool.
That's the first line of the book. He's a hobbit, and therefore that means comfort.
Right.
We know that he likes his creature comforts. The hobbits all do. He's probably similar to Tolkien in that way, and Lewis. Both of them enjoyed their pipes, their slippers, able to sit into their leather chairs, snuggle up at night, read a book, or in their cases, write a book. And I think that's a bit of Bilbo there. And thirdly, I think that there is a kind of engagement, that they're turned outward in their outlook. After these adventures, they realize that a part of their purpose is to take this moral sensibility that they've gained and use it in their communities. In The Lord of the Rings, Frodo and his hobbit companions return to the Shire, because the Shire has now become devastated, and they see that their fight in the outside world has now turned on their communities, and they need to defend that local community of the Shire. The same thing with Bilbo. Bilbo could take a great amount of treasure with him if he wished. He refuses to take the full amount. In fact, he bargains with a part of his share of the treasure that they gain after Smaug the dragon is defeated, to be able to create peace, and he takes a bit back for himself to be able to get back to his community and to realize that there are further adventures that await him now with this awakened moral sensibility.
Okay. So the thing that I want you to watch for when you're watching this movie or you're reading this book is the fact that Gandalf, the wizard, doesn't even know why he has to have the Hobbit. Right?
That's right.
Where is Gandalf? Do we know what the backstory of him, where's he come from? Who's he getting these messages from? Does he ever say? Tolkien?
So Tolkien, he loved these stories. They were treasures to him, not only because they were his family treasures written for his own children, but also because they combined his scholarship, his faith, his belief in stories and the power of a good story. All of this was there in these productions. So Gandalf evolves. We learn in The Lord of the Rings, after Gandalf sacrifices himself for his friends, lays down his life for his friends, he comes back as Gandalf the White. In The Hobbit, he's Gandalf the Grey, so he hasn't made that progression himself. But his backstory, Tolkien will later tell us, is as something like an angel, like an intermediary force. He's not completely omniscient, but he has a sense for things. And he has followed that sense, and that's led him aright. And he's constantly trying to train Bilbo, and then later Frodo, to trust that inner light that they have. This inner moral sense, this moral compass, that's something that can be trusted and that it should be followed. And when it is, things turn out right. Or to use the Shaker, things turn round right.
Here's what is interesting to me, and this is, I mean, again, I was watching this movie because I don't know how many of us felt like they got their head kicked in during the election, and you kind of wonder, what have we done? But this reaffirmed again some eternal truths. And, Tolkien hated analogies. He did not write this as an analogy.
As an allegory.
Yeah, okay. He was not trying to write, because they were saying, are the orcs the Nazis in 1937? And he said, I do not like allegories. This is not an allegory. But I see Gandalf, as many of us, that we don't know why we're supposed to do something entirely, but we just know we're supposed to do it. And at one point, Gandalf is asked by the elfin queen, or who is she? The elfin...
Right, she's one of the elfin leaders.
Okay. And she looks at Gandalf and says, why? Why the halfling? She doesn't know. Why the halfling? And Gandalf says, I don't know. But maybe because I'm afraid, and he gives me courage. I found that fascinating. They leave the elfin realm, and they go in and they are sucked down into the orc world. What are the orcs?
The orcs are creatures that have become degraded and no longer have this moral sensibility. They are at war with everyone, and essentially are the embodiment of and used by evil inside of The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. And we see that really turn out in The Lord of the Rings.
So they're not evil themselves. They're just doers of evil. They don't care.
That's right. Later on, we'll see creations that are designed to be evil, but the orcs not as much in The Hobbit.
So, I mean, again, I know it's not written as an allegory, but that could be any of us too. That you're just living, and because they're playing games, let's play games. Let's, you know,
right.
They're.
Right. And he gives them Cockney accents. Sometimes they carry that on. The trolls have them in The Hobbit, and then it's carried on by Peter Jackson in the Lord of the Rings film with these kinds of Cockney accents. But yes, it could be us. We have to find ourselves in The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings.
Okay, so and then Gollum is the big-eyed guy, Schmeagol, living underneath, really underneath the orcs.
That's right.
Who is he?
We later learn that he himself had been a hobbit, and after he comes into possession of the ring, and the ring essentially comes into possession of him, like Smaug, he sits in a mountain and he simply guards this ring, says he wants to leave it but can't, and grows smaller. His natural teleology, his natural progression as a hobbit is thwarted, and he essentially becomes a character who's corrupt because of the ring.
Okay, so the dragon wants the gold, and he does the same thing. He just goes in, and he goes to sleep with the gold, right?
Yeah.
Same kind of story. Are we to see the parallels between the dragon and
Smeagol, Gollum? I think there's something that is there about dragon sickness. What is this dragon sickness? It's when you become so attached to material possessions, like the gold, after Smaug has destroyed the lands, that it cankers your soul. And I think there's a strong parallel there with Smaug, who doesn't have any need for this gold, simply devastates the lands around him, wants it to possess it. And Gollum, who comes into possession of the ring, and the ring cankers him. And later, of course, we see in The Lord of the Rings, this is the problem of anyone who possesses the ring. The thought that the power of their will, the force of their will, the will to control this power is somehow enough. And it's not. So in the economy of grace, in The Hobbit, we're able to see that, and in The Lord of the Rings as well, you can't do this on your own.
Why does because after Bilbo Baggins passes out in that scene we just saw, he passes out, and Gandalf comes to him and says, I thought you were more. I thought you were more than this. Because he says, I'm not going to go on this journey. And he says, I'm not. And he goes to bed, and they start the journey, and they leave the next morning without him. And he changes his mind, but it doesn't address why. Why did he change his mind?
I think I read something by a great Christian writer, Matt Ware, who writes that that's like all of us sometimes. We're on the verge of realizing a dream. Bilbo wants to have an adventure. And just at the moment that he's given a chance to have an adventure, he almost fades from it. He says, no, I won't have this adventure. He's very comfortable. He's been attached to his ways, to his home, to life as it always is. So there's something about that with us when we're given opportunities, invitations of all kinds in our lives to be what we are. C.S. Lewis says, we want to design little cottages for ourselves. Then the Lord comes into our lives, starts renovating. He wants us to be castles. And suddenly we say, no thanks, I'll be this little cottage. I don't want to really develop into all that I can be. In a sense, that's Bilbo.
And it's kind of, you can take this on as Christians, people of faith, you can take this on in this way, or politically speaking. Let's just take politically, but it'll work both ways. We sit here and we watch shows like this. We watch our own, we watch Hannity going at it with somebody else, and we're like, yeah. And we arm ourselves, but then when we get into the situation, we don't want that adventure. We're armed for it, we're ready for it. We say we want it when we're by ourselves, but then we shrink from it. We don't want that adventure. It'll make us late for dinner. Back in just a second. Okay, I want to go to, I'm going to talk a little bit about divine providence. At one point, Gandalf says to Bilbo Baggins, "You don't really suppose that all your adventures and your wonderful escapes were managed by you yourself, do you?" But they never, ever explain, they never talk about God, they never explain anything. And as I'm watching it, and you'll see it if you watch the movie, you will see when the ring falls out of Gollum's pocket. And this is obviously something he has cared for a very long time. It's his most prized, it's his precious. And it falls out of his pocket. And Paul and I were talking earlier today, and I didn't catch this in the movie, but you say that was divine providence.
Yes, we've got a couple of things going on here. One, evil will always hurt itself. It tries to control things.
Listen to this.
It tries to be in charge of things. So Sauron, we know from The Lord of the Rings, ultimately wants that ring. And so it has to get out of Gollum, go to Bilbo. Bilbo will take it out, and there's that scene in the book where he's got it on his finger, he's invisible, but as soon as he gets out of that mountain, it wants to come off his finger, make him visible so the orcs will slay him and eventually be transported back to Sauron.
So let's just see that. What looks like an accident was actually divine providence of evil trying to get that away so it could come into play and get to him. But there's a critical place when he puts it on, and he puts it on by accident, and he becomes invisible, and Gollum can no longer find him in the cave, and Gollum leads him to the exit. And he now sees his party, which he had been separated from. He's got to go with them, but Gollum's blocking the way. And what happens?
Well, at this moment, and you all know how it's set up, he had to answer those riddles. The riddles themselves, of course, were very timely answers. He didn't know the answer to some of those riddles. Gollum wants to cheat and give him less time, but there's evil hurting itself again. Just as the ring will ultimately destroy Sauron, he answers those riddles because Gollum steps in the water, a fish comes out, the answer to a riddle. So the Hobbit's able to answer it. Well, the key scene, I think, is when he's running, he has to make this choice. He knows Gollum wants to eat him, would have killed him to get possession of this ring. He doesn't yet know what the power of this ring is. He's ready to do it. Gollum is standing in front of the exit to the cave, knowing that the Hobbit has to cross through. There's a tiny section that he has to jump through, and there he makes the decision not to kill Gollum. Little did we know at that point that this is crucial. The whole universe of The Lord of the Rings spins on the Christian virtue of pity. And we're later told that explicitly. Pity, Christian pity, this empathy, compassion, this is what changes the course of things. A tiny decision changes the entire course of The Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit.
So he has an excuse, he has reason, he has the capability of killing, but he has pity, and so he doesn't. And it makes it harder on him to get out of the cave. He could have just killed him, but he doesn't. But here's where the real key comes. If he would have killed him, it would have led him on a different path and a darker path. But he gets out, the ring tries to get off of him and make him visible for the orcs, but it doesn't. But the very next scene, he saves somebody's life. He all of a sudden, this guy who says he doesn't want any adventure at all, he all of a sudden knows why he's on the adventure. And while everybody else, all the dwarves who are the guys with the axes, and they're warriors, they do nothing to save their king or their prince. They do nothing. And here's this little hobbit. Why did that happen? How is that connected to the not killing of Gollum?
I think there's a transformation that occurs, right? You go through the Hobbit, it's that point. Right decisions, just as we always say, making a bad decision, an evil decision has bad consequences. We forget sometimes that virtue rewards virtue, that light attracts light. When you make a good decision, always the ripples will go out, no matter how small that seems. Getting up in the night to care for a child who's crying out, helping someone when no one else is looking. You never know those consequences, but they're there. They will ripple out. In fact, Frodo tries to teach that to Gandalf tries to teach that to Frodo. I don't know if there's enough time for that.
Yeah, do we have time? Let's play that one quick clip here. Forces at work.
So in The Lord of the Rings, when Gandalf is teaching Frodo that Bilbo was meant to find the ring.
Watch this. I want to take a couple of questions here. Let's start with Caleb. Caleb.
Yes, I was wondering, why does the creature Gollum have his split personality disorder?
I think Peter Jackson does a great job of showing this in Lord of the Rings. The longer he possesses the ring, the longer he persists in keeping this ring, he becomes more corrupt. But we still see other elements of what he was before, a hobbit, still there, still struggling. That's what Frodo sees. That's what Frodo senses. And I think this is the interplay, why Frodo doesn't take the hobbits.
You'll see in this particular movie, I think better than the Lord of the Rings, the real split in Gollum. I mean, you've seen the split before in the Lord of the Rings, but there is a real kindness and a real dark evil right next to each other in The Hobbit that is quite amazing. Let's go to, who's Alan?
Yes, I have a question. In current literature, Game of Thrones is an example, they have a lack of the purpose, the divine providence. Everything is by luck, and I just wanted to see how this might speak of the times and how the Hobbit would be a great...
Well, hang on, let me go to Richard, because you had a similar kind of question, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I was just curious about, as far as the writings at the time that Tolkien wrote The Hobbit, and everything that was going on at that period, just how a lot of the writings seem to be about irony and self-doubt and lack of purpose in life.
So this is 1937, that's when he wrote it, and Alan, you're asking about today. Because it's the same kind of thing.
That's right. I think these are excellent questions because it's precisely in The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings that we see the nature of things, that it's important to always have a sense of purpose. Even if you're not quite sure how to articulate it precisely, there's a purpose, there's a guidance. Never cease doing good, never cease doing well. Always recognize that all things work together for the benefit of those who do good and do well. To do and promote good is what we're meant to do.
I'm struck by this, that it doesn't seem to be anyone on the side of good that is absolutely sure. But evil seems to be absolutely sure. I mean, evil loses in the end, but it seems to be absolutely sure. Where everybody else on the good side is kind of like, I think, I'm feeling pretty like that's the way we should go, right? Matt.
Did Tolkien have a lot of prep time before writing the book, or was it just kind of a spur-of-the-moment train of thought?
Tolkien says that he was grading examination scripts during the summer, and that at this time he did a little doodle, and that's where the idea comes to him. We certainly see, though, that in the 19-teens already he's thinking about the broader mythology that he'll construct.
I find this really interesting. He was a professor at Oxford?
Yep.
Okay. So he's a professor at Oxford, but he's not a professor at Oxford. He's a lecturer, right?
He becomes the professor.
The professor.
Yeah. Lewis is a lecturer, C.S. Lewis's friend,
right.
And he thinks that Lewis should get a shot. But Lewis doesn't, and some scholars suggest that it's because he's writing Christian writings, and he's producing a scholarship, and people say, well, you could do more scholarship. But Lewis felt called, a vocation, to write this Christian writing, Christian literature, the broadcast talks while Britain was being bombed by Nazi Germany. He writes that to encourage the people, refuses to back down, doesn't get the professorship. So Tolkien was the professor. Lewis remained ever after a lecturer. Then Cambridge snuck in and said, if Oxford won't give it to you, come over to us and we'll call you a professor here. So the last 10 years of his life, he goes to Cambridge and becomes the professor there at Cambridge.
And I think that is a really interesting thing because it goes to what you two are talking about. You're asking the same questions 70 years apart. You know, we're asking the same questions. Nothing has changed. And I think that gets again to the essence of this story, that it doesn't matter if it's orcs, or whatever. It doesn't matter if we're people or hobbits. It's the same story over and over. And
our choices matter, right? Orcs and elves have a kind of relationship, and what you choose, just like your question, Caleb, about the ring, that's what you become. As a man thinketh, so is he. And what we do helps to form us.
We were just talking about the clip in the break that we played right before the break, where Gandalf said, you were meant to find the ring. Meaning you were meant to go on this journey. meaning you were meant to take on this task, because the conversation is framed in, I don't want this. I don't want this. I didn't ask for it. I don't want it. And he says, Gandalf says to him, nobody wants this when they find themselves in times like this. But he said, you were meant to have it, which is a comforting thought. I would continue and say it's an awesome responsibility, an awesome thought, because again, this teaches us the basic foundational Christian message that, yeah, you have a choice. We were all sent here with free will, and we all have a choice, and we don't have to, and none of us will want the job that we're going to be given. But will we recognize it, and is there anybody that is in our life that will look us in the eye? In fact, let me look you in the eye and say, you were meant for this time. You were meant for this journey. And that is a comforting thought. Back in a minute.